You may be wondering if I'm qualified to speak on this subject. To be fair, as an undergraduate college student, I'm not qualified for anything. But we do learn really well to examine any subject from an academic standpoint. So let's examine sex academically. I won't give you the rundown of the biology of it or tips and tricks on how to be better at it. I'm definitely not qualified for that. But I will be going into sexual attitudes that are important in our culture and how those might be important in our own close relationships. In the textbook Intimate Relationships by Rollin S. Miller, Miller writes a wonderful chapter about sexuality and how sexuality can influence gender differences, our nation as a whole, and same-sex sexuality. So generally, the US is becoming more permissive about sex with each passing decade. 50 years ago, a majority of people disapproved of sex before marriage. These are conservative ideals that you might see within your grandparents' generation or even within your parents' generation. But today, fewer than 25% of people disapprove of sex before marriage. We today tend to hold a more permissive with affection standard, which is the belief that sex before marriage is totally fine as long as it's within a committed relationship between two loving individuals. Most of us at the age that we are will believe in this sort of thing, and it shows because even though 25% of people believe that sex before marriage is wrong, only 9% of people uphold that ideal within their own lives. So our nation is changing really quickly. And you might see that you yourself change as well through life. You may have had sexual attitudes before you ever experienced sex. That's probably true because you were affected by your family, your friends, your community, and then you continue to change as you age. You might think that, as many people do, men and women differ much in their sexual attitudes. This could be true, but as social psychology research likes to do, we might debunk the idea that gender differences are really significant. It's proven that gender differences are perceived to be much more different than they actually are. But when it comes to sexual attitudes, we believe that that's where most of the differences lie, and it could be true. On average, men do seem to hold a more permissive attitudes towards sex than a woman might. They will come away from a hookup feeling a little better because they're more okay with casual sex and sex without love than women are. But this isn't so true because of an innate thing. It's not like an evolutionary, like men love sex, men are open about sex, men always want to have sex. It's not as we might think. It's actually more of how they're raised culturally and stereotype-based. These differences are actually lessening significantly over time, and it's because of this specific attitude, the whole like maybe coming away from a hookup feeling better, that we're able to draw these conclusions, not men in general love sex more than women do or anything like that. There is, however, a sexual double standard, as many of us might have experienced. There's such a thing as slut shaming, as we might know as women, even men, that there's a difference in how we perceive how genders experience sex. Typically, women are judged more harshly than men for their sexual experiences. They might be judged more harshly for having casual sex, for having sexually transmitted infections, and for having a threesome. Again, these are very specific things that they might be judged for. Women aren't always judged for just having sex in general. They might be judged for these things. This is what the research is based on that Miller does. And even though the strong sexual double standard no longer seems to exist because, as we mentioned, the sexual attitudes change in our nation and they change over time, we're seeing a lot less of this sexual double standard, but we can still see that gender might influence how people evaluate a woman or a man's sexual experiences. And though women might be judged more harshly for their sexual experiences, the people that are judged most harshly are probably those in same-sex relationships. We see that the United States as a whole is most conservative concerning same-sex sexuality. We're still kind of holding on to those ideals that same-sex is maybe the thing we need to be less permissive about, but we've made great changes over time. I mean, think about the last 8 years when gay marriage was legalized. That was a huge leap for us. Even though we might think that the United States is more conservative than most other places, we're actually probably one of the lesser conservative Western nations when it comes to this. But we're getting better. The LGBT community is more visible than ever before. We see this in TV shows, and we see this in little ways, like there was a lesbian couple in Finding Dory, if you caught it, that was awesome, and in the Angry Birds movie. We we see that young Americans are more accepting of and even have a generally greater favorable attitude towards those of different sexualities. So as we said, the nation's changing, and a lot of it's because our generations just become more and more permissive as time passes. And who we are sexually and who we love sexually has been proven to be set at birth. This fact, as it is a fact in social psychology, we don't like to state things as facts, but it has been proven through psychological and biological research that sexuality is innate. And as soon as people started realizing this and figuring this out, their attitudes towards same-sex sexuality started to change the most. So when people learned that everything is set at birth and that the fetal brain develops your sexuality, people started becoming more permissive towards same-sex sexuality. Roland S. Miller writes a wonderful chapter about how attitudes are affected by our gender differences, our nation, and our same-sex sexuality. As Jared mentioned one day, and as so many people have told us, attitude is everything. If you're going to go about having sex, you might want to know the differences between attitudes and how they might change in your life and how they have changed for other people in your lives.